Cool, I can do it now. Okay, so let me share my screen with you guys. And this is the world's first civilizations. Our main question for this is, what are the characteristics of a civilization? So we're going to be looking at that here in just a second. The vocabulary, we're going to be comparing civilization versus the word culture because they do not mean the same thing. Also, real quick, I'd like to define monotheism and polytheism. Mono, the root, means one, and theism is a belief in something. So this is a religion that believes in one God. Monotheism, one God. Polytheism, poly meaning many, then would mean the belief in many gods. And we'll get into examples of both of those here in just a second. Last, BCE versus CE. The comparison to this is BC versus AD. The problem with BC and AD is that is a Christian way of documenting time, before Christ, and Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of the Lord. Because a majority of the world is not Christian, in history we use the more neutral BCE, which stands for before the Common Era. Type that out because that's probably going to be important on the quiz. And CE then is the Common Era. So BCE, before the Common Era, is the same thing as before Christ. It just takes out religion. Common Era is the same thing as Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. Again, it just takes out the religion. If you look at how many calendars there are in the world right now, a lot of the world doesn't use the Gregorian calendar that we do with the year 2020. The Chinese calendar is somewhere in the year 5000, I think. The Jewish calendar is in the year 4000 plus. So there are a variety of different calendars, but a majority of the world does use the Gregorian calendar. And a fun fact here, because I'm full of Snapple facts, um, there was a monk named Gregorius, who came up with this calendar that we use. And historians think that he was off by between 5 and 7 years. So it's not actually 2020 that's a dumpster fire. The year should be on this calendar either 2025 or 2027. So 2020 probably wasn't a bad year 5 years ago. That's You're never going to have to know that. I just have this knowledge in my head, so I want to share it with you. So those are the terms that we're going to be using here today. So here we go. What is the difference between a culture and a civilization? Well, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines culture as the customary beliefs, social norms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. So this group they live in the same area, they have a lot of things in common. What they do on a daily basis, what their foods might be, what their religions might be, that is their culture. That is a part of civilizations, which you can see over here. But to be a civilization, these peoples who lived 20,000 years ago, they might have had some of these six things, but they didn't put all six things together, which is why we can't call them actual civilizations. The early civilizations that we're going to be looking at, and those are Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus River Valley people, and the Yellow River Valley people of China, they all lived in these areas that were river valleys. They had floodplains where they were able to raise crops, they were able to domesticate animals. And besides all of that, they had these six things. The first thing you have to have are cities. Cities mean that they were able to live in one area permanently. Before that, we had the hunter and gatherer societies where they had to kind of follow around their food. If they ate all the berries in one region, for example, they would have to go somewhere else. Or if they hunted all the yak and there were no more meat animals around for them, they would have to move locations to go find their food. That is a lifestyle that some people still have, like the Bedouin tribes of Africa and the Middle East. They still are nomads, but for these early peoples that developed cities, and you're going to see a picture of the first city called Ur. These people lived in one area forever. They didn't have to follow the food because they grew the food themselves, whether through irrigation or through domestication of animals or a combination of both. The second characteristic of a civilization is a government. They had to have a way of ruling their people. They couldn't just have anarchy where it was just chaos. If you stole something, there had to be a punishment. And in some of these early areas, like in Iran, modern day Iran, if you got caught stealing, you got your hand chopped off. If you got caught stealing twice, you got your other hand chopped off. Got caught a third time, they cut off your head. You were done. So government, an early form of government of keeping order within their society. Next up, you had to have religion, some sort of belief system. For many of these early peoples, it was polytheism. You had a sun god, a river god, a land god, something like a Mother Earth type of figure. They had gods for everything in their life. You would have household gods. The goddess of the hearth is an example from ancient Greece. They had gods for everything. That would eventually change with the combination of like Zoroastrianism. We would get, that's in modern day Iran too. You would get the world's first monotheistic religion, which is Judaism. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The fourth characteristic of a civilization that we're going to talk about is social structure. You had to have like workers, government workers, field workers, for example, specialists, bakers, candlestick makers, butchers, and then you would have government personnel as well. So everybody in this society would have a job. Later in the week, one of the peoples that we're going to look at with their social structure is India in the Indus River Valley civilization. They had what is called a caste system, and it was pretty brutal. You were born into this caste, and you couldn't move out of it. The only hope for you to move up into the better caste was when you died. If you lived a good life, they believed you would be reincarnated into the better one. But then there was this group at the bottom called the undesirables or the untouchables. They were the worst of the worst, but we'll get into that later in the week. So a social structure of some sort, upper class, middle class, lower class, that kind of thing. Number five, a system of writing. Some of the early writing, like cuneiform, you're going to see a picture of. It started off with just a couple of slashes, and then those would turn into pictographs like hieroglyphics like the Egyptians had, and that would evolve into our system of writing like we have today. So writing is very important, obviously. And then number six, artistic activity. These people couldn't just sit around all the time farming. They had to do something to show their culture, and that is through art, whether that be monumental architecture, like the Great Pyramids, or artwork, something like the Mona Lisa. So if you have a region that had four out of these six, we would not technically consider them a civilization. But if they had all six of these things, like if you look at the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, they've got all six of these things in the Americas. So those are the early civilizations. If you have any questions, please hold them for the end, or you can send them in an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about these six. But these are six important characteristics of civilizations. And here are some pictures to show you guys all of this. This is the city of Ur, or what is left of it. It's actually been pretty remarkably preserved because it is thousands of years old. So again, we would have a wall around this probably for defense, and this enabled people to live here permanently. Next up, government. Looks like a lot of people who knows what they know. Religion. So over here on the left, we have a bunch of the symbols of different religions that we're going to be talking about. The cross representing Christianity, the Star of David representing Judaism, Islam here, the sickle and star, or the half moon and star, Shintoism. You're not going to have to know these symbols. Just know that most religions would adopt a symbol to represent their religion. On the right, we have social structure. This is from ancient Japan, where you would have the emperor at the top going all the way down to the lowest of the social class. Again, you're going to be seeing the Indian caste system later in the week. Writing, this is cuneiform. It looks kind of like pictures a little bit, and you can easily see how this would evolve into hieroglyphics like in ancient Egypt, or it kind of even represents a modern Chinese or a Japanese characters where it looks like they're drawing pictures more than letters as we would be familiar with them. But this is one of the early forms of writing, cuneiform. Monumental architecture, we've got Chichen Itza down in Mexico. You can see the pyramids, the step pyramids here. It's interesting that if we look at where pyramids are around the world, they're in like South America, they're in Africa, obviously in Egypt, and they're in Asia. So they arise where a lot of these early civilizations arise, but we don't know that there was a lot of communication between a lot of these regions. So how is it then that these peoples from different parts of the world are able to come up with the same type of monumental architecture? That's an interesting question that historians and archaeologists are still looking at. What else do we have? We have art. So here is some artwork. Besides the monumental architecture, obviously, we have the Mona Lisa on the left, and we've got Michelangelo's statue of David on the right. So those are just examples of artwork. Okay, so let's talk about the first civilizations. These peoples from Western Asia and from Egypt. Oh, PBS blocked it. That's sad. So I'll go through and I'll tell you what you need to write down or what you need to notate in your notes. What I do want you to write is the first bullet. The first civilizations were built by the people of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Mesopotamia gets credit as the first civilization. It literally, Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. And the rivers that we're talking about here are the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in modern day Iraq. So the first time that people lived in an area long enough to build cities, to domesticate animals, and all that good stuff happens in modern day Iraq. The bad news about that is when we were at fighting Iraq and when ISIS was in Iraq and everybody was blowing Iraq up with like bombs and bombs and bombs, we destroyed a lot of artifacts from the first civilization. So, kind of a big oops in that world. Egypt is going to be the second. Closely followed at this time are the ancient Chinese peoples and the ancient Indian people of the Indus River Valley. We are going to see a decline in empires by about 1500 of before the Common Era because we're now going to see modern states rise. So we don't have as many of these gigantor empires as there used to be. Now, obviously, there are going to be some, like we're going to have the ancient Romans and the ancient Egyptians with their big empires and the Persians, but there's not going to be nearly as many worldwide as there had been. We're going to talk briefly here about the Israelites. And what's important about the Israelites is they develop the first major monotheistic religion in the West, and that is Judaism. So if you're taking notes, this is something you need to write down. You'll need Mesopotamia and Egypt, and you'll need the Israelites with monotheism, specifically being Judaism. So this is the Jewish people. Jewish people have been around for 4,000 years. And they've been persecuted for much of their existence. But this is the first time that the people got together. Specifically, Abraham was the one who started this religion. And he said, we believe in one God. And they called their God Yahweh. And Yahweh was a sacred name where you wouldn't say that name if you were Jewish. But they established their beliefs. They had the Ten Commandments, which if you are a Christian follower, this should sound familiar. And the reason it sounds familiar is because Judaism was the original religion. Jesus was Jewish, and what broke off of Judaism was Christianity. So we have these two major monotheistic religions that originate in the same area that are very similar. If you look at the holy books for Judaism, it is the Torah, is the main holy book. The Torah is the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. So these two religions are very closely related. What separates them is the Christian belief that Jesus was the Son of God. And so the New Testament of the Bible is all about that. Looking at Islam, which again originates in the same area, they have essentially three portions of their holy book, the Quran. It's the Jewish Torah, so the Old Testament, the Christian New Testament, and their newest testament is the teachings of Muhammad. So if you look at these three major religions, we think that they're very, very different, but they're really not. They're based off of the same religion, which is Judaism. They've just evolved to show different parts of things. We're going to do a religions comparison later this week as well. And as historians, my little historians out there, you have to remember that when we talk about religion, we're doing it from a historian's perspective. We're not saying this religion is right, this religion is wrong. All we're saying is this is what the people believe. That's it. No judgment, nothing else. We are just saying this is it. This is their belief. So in this case, we have the Jews with the Ten Commandments guiding them through everything. And that is the first major monotheistic religion that we're going to look at. Okay? Next up, ancient India. This is, I think, our last slide, actually. So we're doing good. This civilization pops up along the Indus River Valley. And I mentioned river valleys before because all of the four major civilizations that we're going to look at here, they all arose around a river valley. If you think about ancient Egypt, because I know you cover ancient Egypt in, I think, fifth grade, you know about the Nile, you know it floods seasonally, and the silt from the flooding provided great farmland for the people of Egypt. Same story at all these other places. So we have the Yellow River or the Yangtze River in China, the Indus River here, and then the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia. So the rivers were very, very important, not only for drinking, but for transportation and for irrigation stuff as well. Next semester, when we look at World War II and Nazi Germany, we're going to talk about the Aryans because the Nazis wanted this purified Superman race of people. The Aryan term actually originates here in India. So the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Superman that Hitler had in mind is not what the original Aryans here were. But these people, the Aryan people, they start the caste system that I had mentioned earlier and that we'll be looking at later on. In this area, two major religions are created, Buddhism and Hinduism. They start in India. Uh, Today, majority of India is Hindu or Buddhist, and they don't really get along. Actually, Buddhism is smaller. It's Hinduism and another one that escapes me. It doesn't matter right now because we'll get into it later on. Uh, but so these are polytheistic religions. In Buddhism, they have Siddhartha Gautama, who they call Buddha, where your goal is just to achieve enlightenment, achieve nirvana. Um, and the way to do that was to be a good person, essentially. And if your ideal form, you want to evolve yourself into Buddha. Hinduism, polytheistic. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, there's some Hindu gods in there, like Shiva. Um, we'll get into that again with, I think, Wednesday's assignment. So these are the early civilizations. What I'd like to do is I'd like to, I was going to show you a map, but we're not doing map work because we're all online right now. So that's it for right now. That is a glimpse of our early civilizations. To recap, we have a couple of terms that we need to redefine: monotheism, the belief in one God; polytheism, the belief in many gods. BCE is before the Common Era. CE is Common Era. And then you have 6 characteristics of a civilization. Those are all going to be extremely important. What's also important, where did the first civilizations pop up? The answer is there: Mesopotamia and Egypt, followed quickly by the Yangtze River Valley in China and the Indus River Valley in India. So